Shalom to all. Today's daf is Yerushalmi Brachot daf mem. We are starting the fifth line at the two dots, and in the Vilna Tzur daf, it's Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, 5 lines up from the bottom at the beginning of the line. And today's daf is sponsored Lilu Nishmas Mars Miriam Zara Basar Yaakov Moshe. Her neshama should have an aliyah. And Pesach the Mishnah had told us that Im Lav Yiskasu Ma'am V'Yikra, if he's unable to come out of the mikvah before his Zman Kriyas Shema, so then he should just cover himself with water, and then he can say Shema like that. Now the Gemara explains Masnisa. Our Mishnah is talking about Bachurin where the mikvah water is dirty. Aval B'Tzlulin Aser. If the mikvah water is clear, so then it's Aser for him to do so. That's because he has an issue of Libay Rayas Ha'erva. Since the water is clear, he still has a problem of Libay Rayas Ha'erva. If he's able to dirty the water with his feet, Yachar, so then he should do so. This means that there's dirt at the bottom of the mikvah, and if he stirs it up with his foot, so the water is going to become cloudy, so then he can say Kriyas Shema. Now the Gemara is going to discuss at length the permissibility of saying Divarim Sheba Kedusha, either learning or davening, saying Kriyas Shema, something like that, in front of something that has a foul odor or a terrible smell. And this goes for our Mishnah that says, how far away does a person have to distance himself from these things we mentioned in our Mishnah, Dalet Ames. So now we continue with this. The Gemara tells us, Tani, we have a brayso. A person has to distance himself 4 amos from human excrement if he wants to say Dvarim Sheb Kedusha. This is because human excrement, Tsayas Adam, smells terrible. And when we say Klavim Arba Amos, he also has to distance himself from Tsayas Klavim, from dog excrement, 4 amos. However, that's only Ubishashu Nice and La'ires, only once it was placed onto iris, onto hides to tan them. As part of the hide tanning process, they would use dog excrement, and this made it smell very bad. So in this state, he would have to distance himself 4 amos. Rabbi Yirmiyah B'Shem Rabbi Zecharia tells us, Nevela shenisrcha, a carcass of a dead animal that became putrid, that became disgusting, tzarich laharchik mimen arba amos, a person has to go 4 amos away from it. And Amar Rabbi Vino says, we must nisa Amar Kain. That's what our Mishnah said. What did our Mishnah tell us? V'kam yarchik mehenu minat tzaya arba amos. How far does a person have to distance himself from them and from tzaya? 4 amos. And included in the them of the Mishnah is Mei Mishra, so we see that even from foul-smelling things other than human excrement, one would have to distance himself 4 amos. But now Amar Avami, Amar Shamay, they tried knocking this away. Tifter with Mishra Shal Kaivsin. We can explain that when the Mishnah says Mei Mishra, it's talking about Mishra Shal Kaivsin. What's that? Dirty laundry water. The Mishnah could be talking about dirty laundry water that the laundry had human saya in it. So it could be that our Mishnah is only talking about human saya and it's not talking about other bad-smelling things. But now Amalei Rav Mani told him, Imbe Mishra Shal Kaivsin, if we're talking about dirty laundry water, Hataninan, we already learned that in the Mishnah. Loi b'mayim harayim v'loi b'mei ha-mishra. And mayim harayim, it means foul-smelling water. So why would the Mishnah also have to mention mei ha-mishra if mei ha-mishra is talking about foul-smelling water because it has human excrement in it? It must be that mei ha-mishra is not talking about water that has human excrement in it, like dirty laundry water. It must be it's talking about other foul-smelling things, like we said, water that had flax soaking in it. So we see that even with other things that smell bad, one would have to distance himself 4 amos. And the Gemara continues, Tani, we have a brayso. Katan shu yachol lechol kazayis dagan, a child that's of the age that he's able to eat a kazayis of grain, parshim mitzayasu emei meraglav arba amos, one would have to distance himself 4 amos from that child's tsaya or his urine. If he's not able to eat a kazayis of grain, so then one does not have to distance himself dalet amos from this child's tsaya or urine. But now the Gemara tells us, they asked in front of Rabavo, why does one have to distance himself from tsaya and from urine? So Amar Lain, that's because a person has bad thoughts. A person has bad thoughts, so in someone of a spiritual sense, the bad thoughts cause a bad smell to that which comes out of his body. Now Amar Lain, they said to him, V'loi katan hu, isn't he a katan? A katan has bad thoughts? So Amar Lain, he told them, V'loi ksev doesn't say in the pasuk, Ki yetzer lev ha'adam ramen urav, that the yetzer of the heart of a person is bad already from his youth. And Amar Rav Yudan says, Min arav ksev. We could read it instead of as ne'urav, his youth. What does min arav mean? Mishashu nin arv yetzel olam, from the time he already stirred and came out into the world, already a person has the yetzer hara. Now Chazal determined that the yetzer hara doesn't have an impact on him until he's old enough to eat a kazayis of grain, and only then his human waste begins to smell. But we see that a person's bad thoughts can have an impact on their waste already at a very young age. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar, he says, Marchikin miglali behema arba amos. A person has to distance himself from animal dung 4 amos. And Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak Amar, he says, berachim. That's only if it's soft, if it's not dried yet. And B'vadim shel chamor, that's only if it came from a donkey. And Rav Chia Bar Abba Amar, he says, b'bomad aderech, that's only when the donkey had just come back from a journey, so then the exertion from the journey makes its dung smell very bad. Levi Amar, he says, Marchikin mitzayis chazir arba amos. A person has to distance himself from the tzaya of a chazer 4 amos. B'tani Kain, we have a brayso like that, Marchikin mitzayis chazer arba amos, and mitzayis hanemiya arba amos. One must distance himself 4 amos from the tzaya of an emiya. An emiya is a cat-like animal. Some explain that it's referring to a marten, M-A-R-T-E-N. This was an animal that was found around people's houses back in the day. Its tzaya smells very bad. And mitzayis hatarigoyim arba amos, one would have to distance himself 4 amos from tzaya of chickens. Memo base on top, Rabbi Yossi Bar Avin B'Shem Rav Chana says, Ubovad ba'adumim, that's only if it's red chicken. chickens. And the Gemara continues talking about foul-smelling things. Tani marchikin me'reach ra arba amos. A person has to distance himself 4 amos from any source of bad-smelling things if he wants to be involved in Dvarim Shel Kedusha. And Amar Rav Ami says, misayf reach ra arba amos. It has to be 4 amos from where the bad smell ends. It's not enough just to be by the bad smell and walk 4 amos away. Person has to walk away until he can't smell it anymore, and then add another 4 amos to that. And Hadadat Amar was only said la'achrav if it's behind him. So if it's behind him, he walks away 4 amos, and that's okay. Avalafanav, but if it's in front of him, on makam shein of roisai, he has to walk away until his eyes can't see it anymore. Even if he's way more than 4 amos and he can't smell it, still it's not proper to be involved in Dvarim Shel Kedusha if he can see this bad smelling thing. Now we have a story to illustrate this. Kadar Rav Lai v'chavraya, like Rav Lai and his colleagues, Havu Yasvin Kumei Pundakai Baramsha, they were sitting in front of an inn at night, and there was donkeys bringing people back and forth, and those donkeys had to relieve themselves in the area. They asked him, aren't we allowed to speak in words of Torah over here because of the dung that's here? So he told him, since if it was daytime, we would see what's in front of us, and that means that we would not be allowed to talk in Torah because that means we would have something bad in front of us. Baram kedain aser, so too now it's aser as well. And more about foul-smelling things. Tani, we have a brisa, graph. What's a graph? So the best way to translate graph is a chamber pot. This is a bucket or pot of sorts that was meant for human waste. So if there's a graph over here, echad shel rei ve'echad shel mayim, whether it's meant for excrement or it's meant for urine, a person has to distance himself from it, dalad ames, and this is even if it's totally clean and it doesn't have anything in it. Now this is because we're talking about a chamber pot, a graph, which is designated for human waste. And therefore, even if it's clean and it doesn't have anything in it, a person still has to walk away dalad ames. Now this brisa continues talking about a vessel that has urine in it, but it's not officially a graph. If it's in front of the bed, if you put a little bit of water into it, yikra, then he could say kriyas shema, but if not, yikra, he's not allowed to say kriyas shema. Now Rav Zakai says, if you put a whole revius of water into it, then he could say shema, if not, no saying shema. Now when is it that we say he has to put a whole revius of water in? So revius b'seich revius. He would have to put a revius of water in to dilute a revius of urine. Echad kli katan ve'echad kli gadol, whether we're talking about a small kli that has only revius of urine, whether we're talking about a large kli that has a lot of revius. 1 revius would be enough for that, but less than a revius, he needs less water. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, he says, shal achar mita yikra. If it's behind the bed, he could say kriyas shema. Shal afnei mita, if it's in front of the bed, lo yikra, he's not allowed to say kriyas shema. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he says, afilu triklan eser al eser lo yikra. Even if he's in a palace or if he's in a large room, which is 10 by 10 ames, it could be a huge room, still no saying kriyas shema, until he covers it, or if he puts it underneath the bed. The whole room that he's in is considered dalad ames, so it doesn't make a difference that the thing's actually very far away from him. He has to do a positive action of covering it or putting it under the bed before he's involved in Dvarim Shel Kedusha. Now Rav Yaakov Bar Acha tells us, B'Shem Rav Chia Barva, Hayu Reb Chanina Tartaya paskind kahadad Reb Shimon ben Elazar, like Reb Shimon ben Elazar in this case. Now Reb Binyamin Bar Yafes tells us, B'Shem Reb Yechanan, Tzaya Kol Shehi Bevatla Baroik. If there's a tiny little bit of tzaya here, so then he could mevatel it with some spit, which means he could spit on top of it. That spit covers this little bit of tzaya, and that's considered covering it, and he could be involved in Dvarim Shel Kedusha. Now Reb Zecharia and Rabbi Yaakov Bar Zavdi Havu Yasvin, and they were talking and learning. Cham and Siyasa, they saw a little bit of tzaya. Come Rabbi Yaakov Bar Zavdi Rakakala. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Zavdi got up and he spat on it to cover it over. Now Amalei Reb Zecharia told him, Min Yama Tigna. That's only good for the amount of time that it takes to get from the sea to a place called Tigna. Meaning covering over this little bit of tzaya with spit only helps you for a short amount of time. That's because within a short amount of time, the spit is going to be absorbed into the tzaya, and once again, it's not going to be covered. And the way the Reb Zecharia told him that is by saying the amount of time you have to get from the sea to Tigna, which is a place very close by, that's how much time you have. So up until now, we're just discussing where a person is allowed to say Dvarim Shel Kedusha. Now we're going to discuss how a person is to treat Dvarim Shel Kedusha, such as Sfarim. The Gemara tells us, Teva Shehi Malei Sfarim, a box which is full of Sfarim. This is holy scrolls. Not talking about a Sefer Torah, but other holy scrolls. He's allowed to place it underneath the head of the bed. He's not to place it underneath the feet of the bed. That's not proper to put a box of Sfarim underneath where a person's feet are. Now Rav Alvin tells us, the bed itself has to be 10 tvachim tall. 10 tvachim, we know throughout Mishnah and Gemara, is a totally separate rishos. We know that a mechitza has to be 10 tvachim tall. We know that a wall that's 10 tvachim tall is considered a proper wall. So the bed has to be 10 tvachim tall. So now it's like the Sfarim are a different rishos. And Also, the straps of the bed, those are the straps that we learned about that they held the mattress, they're not allowed to be touching the box, because then it looks like he's resting on the box. Now, Rabbi Yosef paskin in the place of Shmuel bar Yitzchak, just like Rav Chana said. Furthermore, the Gemara continues, a person is not allowed to have tashmish if there's a Sefer Torah in the same house as him. And according to the Farshim, this really means in the same room as him, not in the same house. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah tells us, if it was wrapped in a cloth, meaning he had a mantle on the Sefer Torah, or it was placed in a window which was 10 tvachim high, mutter, then it's permitted for him to have tashmish even though it's in the same room as him. That's because it's covered over, or it's considered like it's in a separate rishos. Now, Rabbi Shua ben Levi tells us, also like kil yain, he should make a curtain for it if it's behind a curtain, so he's allowed to have tashmish in the same room. Mem alpha on top, the Gemara continues, a person should not sit on the same bench that a Sefer Torah is on. It's improper to sit on a bench that a Sefer Torah is resting on. Now, Ma'aser Rabbi Eliezer, there's a story with Rabbi Eliezer, he was sitting on a bench that had a Sefer Torah on it, and then when he noticed that he was doing this, he recoiled from in front of this, like a person recoils in front of a snake. He was aghast at himself. How could I do this? Now, if the Sefer Torah was placed on something else, which was on the bench, so then he's allowed to sit on the bench, because it's not like he's on the same thing the Sefer Torah is on. Now, ad heichan, up until where? Meaning, on what type of thing does the Sefer Torah have to be placed on to allow this person to sit on the bench? So Rav Abba says, B'Shem Rav Chana, tafach, it has to be placed on something which is a tafach tall. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah tells us, B'Shem Rav Ze'era, afilu kol shehu, even if it's placed on something which is a kol shehu, it's very thin, it could be a thin little board or something, or perhaps a little piece of cardboard, that's sufficient also, because that shows that he's not on the same bench that the Sefer Torah is on, the Sefer Torah is on something else. And one last thing about Svarim, Dais Kishim Aleh Svarim, a sack or a bag that's full of Svarim, or there was bones of a deceased person in this bag, he could sling it behind himself and ride on a horse like that. And the chiddush over here is that that's not considered disrespect to the Svarim or that Samas Hameis to have it be behind him. As long as he's not sitting on it, it's okay if it's behind him. It being behind him is not a lack of respect. We're going to stop here for the day. Pick up tomorrow in a similar vein, talking about how to treat tefillin properly. For now, everyone should have a wonderful day.